Welcome to our LB's The Lover of Books author chat. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you've made it, and thank you for joining. Make sure you click on the subscribe on my channel, on my YouTube channel. I am nearing 1,100 subscribers, y'all. I'm 9 away. So big thanks to all of you who have already done that, who've already clicked. And if you haven't, it's not too late. Also, I guess if this will be recorded on the YouTube, and there's 50 author chats, actually more than 50 now there. So you may find other authors that you haven't seen, haven't read, and check them out. But as always, we do discuss spoilers. So warning, please read the book before you watch the video unless you don't care about spoilers. But what's exciting is there's already been 12,000 hours watched on my YouTube channel. So you're in great company. You're going to see lots of fantastic books and authors. And I'm betting you've already read some of those. Now I want to introduce this amazing author, Laura Grodstein. Is it Grodstein or Grodstein? How do you say it?
Grodstein.
Grodstein. Okay, Grodstein. She's the author of 5 novels, including this Read with Jenna selection, We Must Not Think of Ourselves. It's a New York Times bestseller, a friend of the family, and a Washington Post Book of the Year, The Explanation for Everything. Lauren's work has been translated into French, Turkish, German, Hebrew, and other languages, and her essays and reviews have been widely published. She teaches at the MFA program at Rutgers University Camden and lives in New Jersey with her husband and children. And I actually saw online where you did a really cool workshop in Paris for some budding authors as well.
Yeah, every summer since 2005. And I'm happy if you guys have any questions about that. I've been telling writers how to get published. Basically, it's a whole how to get your book out into the world workshop. And it's in Paris.
I love it. Well, and Paris on top of that. That's even, more exciting. But today we're here to talk about We Must Not Think of Ourselves. Like I said, it's a read with Jenna Peck. It was inspired by a little known piece of history, the underground group that kept an archive to ensure that the lives of Jewish occupants of the Warsaw Ghetto in World War II were not lost to our history. This is a heart-wrenching novel of love and defiance that people calls gripping, emotional, and against all odds, hopeful. And I loved what Madeline Miller, who's the author of Circe's and Song of Achilles, said. This book is a masterpiece, profound, gripping, urgent, and beautiful. And I agree. Welcome so much, Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to join you guys.
Well, let's go ahead and just get this kicked off. I'm assuming you had to do a lot of research, but how did this particular, because this isn't a well-known subject matter. I mean, obviously World War II, the Holocaust, like people study it all the time, but this is a pretty niche. I mean, it's a very specific time in history and a specific way they took this history and got it to us. So how did you find out about it? And just give us your perspective.
Sure. So I went to Hebrew school, and I grew up in a Jewish family in the New York suburbs. So I really thought, my Holocaust education started when I was young, so I really didn't think that there were like that many stones left to turn over. But in 2019, my sister, it was my nephew's bar mitzvah year. He was turning 13, and he didn't want a big party or anything like that. He wanted to trace our family's history in Poland. Probably like lots of you guys, my family came on my mother's side in the late 1800s, on my father's side, 1918. And they didn't ever want to talk about it. So the truth was, we didn't really know what anybody had left behind, only that it was pretty dark. We did know that on my father's side, and we knew that everyone was from Poland, different parts of Poland, especially Warsaw. We knew that my grandparents and great-grandparents lost lots of cousins in the Holocaust. We didn't know more. So the tour guides had to sort of, instead of tracing our family history, they kind of had to guess. And so they put together an itinerary for us. We were my parents, the three middle generation, my sister's family of 4, my brother's family of 4, my family of 4. The kids ranged at that time in age from 1.5 to 13. And we're in this white van going all around Poland, learning about what it might have been like to be a Jewish person in a country where a third of the population was, a third of the population of Warsaw was Jewish, and 10% of the population of the entire country was Jewish. So there's this huge population that had been wiped out, but left lots of traces. So we took this tour to see the traces, see what had been, meet all the caregivers and all the people who were trying to keep the memory of Jewish Poland alive, despite everything. At the very end of the trip, we went to this place called the Jewish Historical Institute, which was a really sort of bland name. It could have been anything. Many of us were exhausted at this point. Remember, we had a lot of little kids, so many people left to go see the National Soccer Stadium, which was fine. But my sister, my parents, and I went into this institute where the first thing you see written on the wall is what we've been unable to shout out to the world. And that's written in Polish, English, and Yiddish. And then you walk up a set of stairs and slowly the story unfolds of this man named Emanuel Ringelblum, who was an historian, who was there when the gates of the Warsaw Ghetto were locked in November 1940, who gathered this group of intellectuals, writers, rabbis, teachers, and told them to write it all down. He said, write it all down. If we have nothing else, we have our own story. We will deny the Nazis the right to rewrite history. The truth is ours and we will tell it. And so they took notes, they did studies, they took paraphernalia, they stole propaganda posters from the walls. At the beginning of the Gross Action, where my book ends, they buried a lot of it in a huge milk can. And right before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in April 1943, they buried the rest. Almost everybody who was part of this project was killed. Only 3 people of the 60 or so that we know survived. But those 3 people, somehow under the total rubble and destruction of the Warsaw Ghetto, managed in 1946 and again in 1950 to locate the buried treasure, to dig it up, and tell people the truth of what happened. The reason that so few people have actually heard the story, which is remarkable, this archive represents the largest trove of first-person documents written by Jewish people during the Holocaust. But the reason that so few people know about it, I think, is because it was dug up in Poland. And so, Soviet era, behind the Iron Curtain, Poland, when the communist government really, their philosophy was the only true victims of Nazism were other communists, not Jews. So even though most of the death camps were behind the Iron Curtain, were in now communist helmed countries, there wasn't a lot of attention or funding or research paid to anything that was specifically Jewish. So because this archive was dug up in a place that didn't really want to memorialize what happened to the Jews during World War II, it's still kind of unknown or underknown. Many people know about it. Obviously, a major book that I used as research was written about it. There's a documentary about it, but it's not as well known, Laura Beth, as you said, that it should be. And so when we left, I was stunned, first of all, that all of this first person documentation existed. And I said and it was all these narratives, right? Story after story after story, and diaries. And so I said to my sister, there are 1,000 novels in that room. And she said, well, you should write one. And I said, no, because before this, up to this point, I wrote about depressed moms on the Upper West Side, or I was writing very contemporary stuff. But when the pandemic started, I thought, well, and it was about 9 months after our trip to Poland. I thought about this thing every day in my own time for no real reason. I had ordered books about it. I'd watched the documentary about it. And I thought, well, there are no more rules anymore. I'm just going to try it. And so this is the book that resulted.
You use that phrase as well when Pascal's trying to get people to talk about their story. There are no rules, and he sort of uses that approach as well to get the young, the old, everyone to tell a little bit about themselves. It's almost like you had a little bit of the same approach, like out the window, let's just go for it.
Yeah.
Well, with this book, I will say, and I'm just going to start at the beginning. One of my good friends in DC is a curator of the National Holocaust Museum, and Susie Schneider. And she mentioned to me before, she said, I'm so glad you chose this book because not enough people have heard about it. And she also informed me that one of these milk cans is at the Holocaust Museum in DC. So people, if you haven't had the opportunity, please go by and see it. She's retiring, but she gave a group of this book club, I think there were 10 of them, that got to go and have a private tour about all this information. Yeah. And so, first of all, she just wanted to say thank you that you are bringing this more to light. So I wanted to pass that along and just say that I think people are really glad that this is, like you said, it's not hidden, but it's not highlighted either. So thank you for that.
Thank you for telling me that.
Okay, so let's get started on the research part of it, because now you've been to Poland. You've done your own research as far with family. You've been to this Jewish institute and you've watched biographies. You've watched, documentaries. How do you start? Like, how do you determine what you're going to put in this story?
So when I was in Poland, I we saw a lot of stuff. And one of the things I tell this to people, and sometimes they laugh and sometimes they look at me like I'm not a good person. So I'm going to let you guys decide how you feel about this. But we were in the Schindler Museum, which was the Schindler factory. It was in Krakow. And they had a mock-up of a ghetto apartment. And the idea was to show all of these different families, how they were jammed together, right? Because basically the idea was that the Nazis, they called it trying to preserve people's health and safety. They had to remove Jews from their homes and force them into these ghettos, which were often but not always locked. So there was a mock-up. So people had to give up their homes, and often because there wasn't enough housing in the ghettos, they had to move together. So there's this mock-up, this small apartment with two families sharing it, and they had this idea that like people fighting over resources and space, and it's uncomfortable. All of which I totally believe. But I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and a TV show I like to watch was The Real World, which was on MTV. And the idea was like different grown-ups are just or not grown-ups, but like hot 20 somethings are like forced into living space together. And like two of them always end up hooking up. So I was sitting there, and everyone's like crying next to me. And I was like, I wonder if, and then I put that thought away where it should go, because that's not what you should be thinking about at the Krakow factory or the Schindler factory. But when I got home and I kept thinking, and I knew that this had to have happened because Jewish people are people, right? They're not just victims. They're not just players, the mice in this horrible game of cat and mouse that was the Holocaust. They were people, and people do things like this. People sleep with each other when they shouldn't. People fall in love with people who are their spouses. People make difficult choices. People are angry. People are violent. People are more than just who they are at a moment of history. And I thought a way to, without trying to sound too grandiose about it, but a way to reclaim a few of the 6 million people who were killed, understanding that I'm inventing these people, but was to sort of create some people in their full humanity, right? And in so doing, it was to make two people sort of fall in love. And so I started this novel with the idea that I was going to have a widower who's stuck in a ghetto fall in love with one of his married housemates, and just what that love would look like within the pressure of this ghetto.
Well,
And I wanted to use the archive as a mechanism. I wanted him to be an archivist so that he could also enlarge and make real the lives of people whose stories were lost to history. So in the book, he's interviewing all of these people to try to give a sense of the depth and the breadth of Jewish life in Poland before the Holocaust. So those were sort of the twin aims of the book, and the plot kind of followed from there.
okay. Now, one of his students says, not, I don't want to think of anyone as all good or all
Right.
bad. And I think that sort of goes right to your point, like with humanity, because no one's perfect. No one's completely,
Right.
evil. And so I loved that a lot of your characters were nuanced like that. For instance, the Polish guard
Yeah.
is he going to keep the necklace? Is he going to take off with it? But no, he actually kept his word and came back. And so that sort of give and take was, I think, what made it more authentic than anything, because Paskov is a human and has been grieving his wife for quite some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so did you use, I mean, I know that the head of the society that is collecting all of these archives is a real person. I mean, he's named, that is a real person that did this. Pascal obviously is not. He is your fiction character. But did you use some of the information, some of the stories, some of the diary entries for part of your story as far as the characters and things that are happening that you put into your novel?
So the diary entries that I created are totally fictionalized, but things are inspired. Like there's this weird kind of like spinning mechanism in my brain that'll read a story, put it in there, spin it. Nobody else might know. So for instance, there was a story of in the diary, in the real diaries, of a little girl who was given money, she must have had, her family must have had some resources to go buy a like a cream bun on a street. There were still bakeries. There were still, if you had money in the ghetto, people, you could still buy things. And one of the diarists describes watching her eat and just the way they all sort of shared in the pleasure of that. And I thought, oh, what would it be like to be hungry and to watch someone eat something delicious? And
Yeah.
that kind of spun around. So that wasn't in the diary exactly, but what I read in the diary sort of spun around and became a scene in which all of these starving people watch one character eat a really delicious meal. A lot of the other history was much more, I was really did my best to be faithful to war events. So on my desk, I taped a list of like major events in the war itself and then major events in the Holocaust. And I kept trying to sort of look from, pace the novel according to what was actually happening in the outside. And so a lot of the research I didn't even make its way into the novel, but was just sort of broader World War II history.
Now you have, I mean, I normally get to this question at the end, but since you
Yeah.
brought it up, I mean, you have so much research that you haven't even touched or used. Do you feel like you will dive into this subject matter again? No,
No, never. But I
never.
enjoyed it. So it's really funny, not funny, I guess, but like many authors I know have a great way of turning research into the sort of virtuous sounding thing when really it's just like high-minded procrastination. Like I have tons of research in part because it's so much easier to read than to write. So I'd be like, you know what I have to do today? I just have to sit in this corner with my cat and read all day. Oh, it's work. When really it's just a great way of not having to fight with words on the page. So I have lots of research, not just because I'm so dedicated to the craft of this book, and it was much easier to just sit and read.
Well, Pascal has a way with words himself. The main character, he's a teacher, and there was 5 languages, I think. But the thing he uses to, because there are no books, is to teach the children poetry. And I wondered why you wanted poetry to
Yeah.
be an essential part of this, because it comes up not just in his classroom. I mean, it flows into their homes. So what was it about the poetry that you wanted to
Yeah.
include?
So one of the really nice things, and I wonder if some of your other novelists that you've talked to have said this, but like I one of the true reasons I love writing novels is like I get to indulge myself in all of the things that I love uh in a sort of, I don't know, I just get to be a lot of different people. I get to do a lot of different things. I get to have expertise I don't really have. I really like poetry. I like it. I read it. I don't sit there and read poems every day, and I certainly don't write it. I've tried, I'm not good at it. But um, like a friend of mine was just talking about their hedgehog, and immediately I ruined the mood by reading this really sad poem by Philip Larkin about a hedgehog. And if you guys don't know it, here, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah.
Hedgehog by Philip Larkin. I think it's called Hedgehog, but it's a great,
Okay.
you'll if you Google that, you'll get it. It's a beautiful, anyway, so poetry really enriches my life, and I think so many moments in our lives are best expressed in poems. Like novels can express sort of the course of a life, and a short story can express a day or two in a life, but a poem can express all of those moments that you don't really know, I don't know, that are just, they're fleeting, but when you put them together, they comprise like our inner landscapes. So poetry flows through this book because it sort of flows through mine. And Adam is a lot like me in a lot of ways. And so I just wanted to share this with him, or not even wanted to. When I was thinking of him, he just became this person for whom poetry matters a lot.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and read the quote because I think you just said it perfectly. I also like teaching poems because I believe poetry was where the English language really soared. It was oh my gosh, I can't even talk tonight. Y'all know what I'm saying. Most of the time, but somehow able to turn its simple grammar and plundered vocabulary into the finest poetry written. Shakespearean sonnets and Keatsian odes and Chaucer and Eliot and Pound. I knew and loved them all for different reasons. When I wanted wisdom, I found Dickinson, sorrow, Yeats, company in my grief, Wordsworth. I just loved it because it was I mean, I felt like that was you in there, but I wasn't sure. So it sounds like, that you did have that connection.
I think
Um,
so, yeah.
also, let's keep talking about these children because I think that was also a huge focus on this. And one, there's differences in how to raise these children or allow them to live basically in the ghetto. There, you have the two different mothers who have the different thoughts of let them go and do because there's nothing else. This it's the only way they're going to survive. And then you have this other mother who wants to protect them so much. Um, and then on top of that, you have this idea of a loss of a childhood. So talk about that a little bit because I would think that that would be a hard thing to write about. I know you're a parent, um, and just give us your perspective on it.
So I wrote this book during COVID, and there was so much about what to do with your kids, how to keep them safe, the best way to keep them safe, what matters more, their interior lives or their physical bodies, right? My son was 11 when COVID started and moved to school. And at first it was sort of fun, like you can just sleep late and just check in online to get your classes. But pretty soon he was starting to really suffer. My daughter was so little at the time that it was sort of okay, or less, it was less troubling for her for some reason. But for my son, it was really hard. And I didn't, my mom pretty early on in the pandemic lost a friend to it. And I wasn't especially terrified of it, but for me, but I was especially terrified of it for him. And it was before we knew that it wasn't going to be necessarily as difficult for kids as it, or that the pandemic itself, that COVID wouldn't be as hard on kids as it is on adults. And I was so torn. I remember as spring warmed up and kids were sort of out on their bikes or out playing basketball, doing things outside. And I was torn, but in the end, I let him go. I let him go. He had to be with his friends. I couldn't imagine anything worse than him sitting inside one more day. And I was in a way less afraid of COVID than I was of him crying anymore. And I don't know. I still don't know. I mean, I know that it was the right thing to do because, knock wood, everything turned
Right.
out fine. He's fine. We were fine. But I felt that tension in me, and in so many of the parents that I knew at that time, and it mapped so perfectly onto the book I was trying to write. Now, obviously, our COVID circumstances were fine. We had plenty to eat. We were physically safe. It turned out we were not in, nobody was going to shoot us in the street. We were fine. And what was happening in the ghetto obviously was not.
Right.
And most people didn't survive it. So I don't want to make any sort of like, specious, or I don't want to make any gross
It's not a
comparison.
direct comparison, obviously. Yeah.
But sometimes all you need to write a book is like a little window
Hmm.
into what it might have been like. And for me, COVID really provided that window into what it would be like to raise your children in these impossible circumstances. And I tried to sort of visit that upon the mothers in this book. There was the mother who was very concerned about her children and their safety and their whereabouts, and the mother who was like, I have to just let them go and trust because I can't keep them in an apartment all day. I don't, they have
Right.
to some kind of childhood.
Well, he
And in
even
the end,
mentioned,
that mother, what?
yeah. Well, I was just saying, in the end, I mean, they're referred to as the lifeblood of the ghetto because so many of these children had to grow up so fast. They really
Yeah,
don't know anything different or much different. I mean, they just sort of adapt so fast, but they really are what's keeping the ghetto alive in so many ways because they are the
absolutely.
ones that are able to get out. They are the ones that trade. I mean, it's
Mhm.
it's fascinating, but it's also horrifying as a parent, right? I mean, because what ends up happening is her son does die exactly like she imagined he would,
Yeah,
leaving, so it's just,
yeah,
I don't know, it takes your breath away.
yeah. And all of
Yeah.
that is true. All of that is real and true. That's what happened.
Ugh. Okay. I'm going to keep moving along because there's so many topics that I want to keep discussing. You talked about the ghetto, being, I think you said it was about a mile and a half square foot, like a postage stamp, really. But then there's a point where he can't even remember where the bakery was. Like I don't know if he
Yeah.
gets turned around. And I just have there's just a very quick question on this. Was that a dream? Was he? because in that point, I think it was a candy store, right? He's like, he's imagining it, or is it hunger? Like, what was that there?
So there really was a Merenstein's confectionery. I
Okay.
wrote that scene after I saw a picture of that place, but I wanted it to feel almost dreamlike. I wanted it in the book because this really did happen where circumstances were terrible in the beginning, but then they got so much worse. And so
Yeah.
something that could be most in the way that you can't even remember. Like I have a friend who's going through a divorce and she can't even remember how happy they used to be, but she looks at pictures and knows that they were, you know? And
Hmm.
I feel something similar that you can't even remember that something magical could have existed. It feels like a dream, but it really was there. So I really wanted to give it a dreamlike, sort of feeling that scene. But to me, it really existed. And then either it went out of business or it just vanished. And, you know, it, but yes, but the sort of dreamy feeling of that was sort of intentional.
I loved it. And I think it goes well with sort of the two ways of thinking of ghetto inhabitants. You have Pascal, who, has this, I'm so fortunate to be alive, and that keeps him going, this positive outlook. And then you have, someone from his past, from his academia, that they call the ghetto nihilist, who, are just, they're just, he says, confuse darkness for wisdom. And there's, no point in seeing the charity or kindness. And that's impossible for him. So, you have
Right.
these two views, and how that helps them get through it or be able to stomach some of it, maybe.
You learn a lot about yourself. I learned a lot about myself in writing a book like this. Like one of the things I learned is that I am, as much as I'm a pessimist about like whether or not the team I like is going to win the baseball game or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
I'm generally an optimist, or at least I believe things will work out. I can't live my life without just assuming it has to be okay. Somehow it has to be okay. Which is not to say that I'm blind to the challenges that I face or that people face, my community faces, the world faces, but rather that I just feel like in the end, it's things will have to work out somehow. They'll have to. Um, and that whatever that is my mantra. That's sort of how I move through the world. So I learned that about myself. And I don't know if it's, and then I've also met in my life, as you have too, right? These nihilists, these people who are dark all the time and who think that because they're dark, they're smart, or because they expect the worst and think the worst of other human beings, that somehow that's a kind of wisdom. But it's not. It's a sort of adolescent posture. And there were lots of people. I mean, a lot of the quotes from the scene that you're referencing came not directly from the diary, but lots of people in the diaries expressed views like his. And I felt it was really important to get those into the book. Um, but I'm an atom in this sort of book, in this dyad. Like I just believe that most people, most of the time, fundamentally want to be useful, helpful, and good. They just, not all the time, and certainly not, everyone, and not to everyone. And lots of people do lots of nasty things, but like the baseline for most people, most of the time, is some some kind of goodness, which I think is why Adam's so perplexed all the time by the Nazis. He's often more
Yeah.
perplexed than he is angry,
Yeah.
because his worldview is mine, that most people most of the time are mostly good. So what the hell happened to these people? Why
Right.
are they doing, like, he's angry, but more than angry, usually he's just mystified at this.
Well, I also believe that he thinks that he's lucky because he
Yes,
does have a purpose, being an archivist, and he has this record keeping job to do. And
absolutely. Yeah.
that is something I think that kept him alive and kept him positive, because, and I think a lot of people probably do that, right? Through their job, they have purpose. And so for me, that was also something that gave him that spark of hope. Whereas, although his counterpart that was the nihilist was also in that group, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
it's just a way of thinking, and how do you get through this. It was, to me, that was a fascinating conundrum between the two of them, especially coming from quite a bit of the same background, really. I mean, one was much
Yeah.
older, but it was just fascinating. The other thing I think was the fact that they all convinced themselves that the Germans were logical, and that why would they do this? It really, that mystification through them. And then also it didn't make sense that they would want to kill all these people because they're able bodies, right? And
Yeah.
so that it blew, I mean, it blows everybody's mind, but logic, you can't use logic with this is the point I think that I
I
came across.
kept
It's just like,
asking those questions when I was in Poland. I was like, but why? Why would they at the end of the war when they speeded up the killing? They sped up
yeah,
the killing at the end of the war because they honestly believed that they were wiping out an inhuman sort of a race of people who were, like, I don't know, I don't even know what the right word is, who were just like sucking the life force out of everybody else, and that their job, one of the I had sort of always thought that the Holocaust was adjacent to the Nazis' aims. Do you know what I mean? That like
right,
the Nazis wanted to take over the world, establish a 1,000-year Reich, and also eliminate all the Jews. But that's not really it. They wanted to eliminate all the Jews,
yeah,
and they wanted to do all those other things, and they were equal. So
right.
that
It wasn't a lesser demand. Yeah,
no, so that winning the war and killing and eliminating every Jew from the face of the earth were equal imperatives. And therefore, they, even when they were losing the war, they were still desperate to accomplish at least this one aim. It's amazing. And the reason they didn't, I guess, want to throw them to the front is that they didn't think of them as people. You can't have soldiers who aren't people. I don't know. But then I was like, but then they used them as they slept with them, or they, you know what I mean? Or they used them as their tailors or their doctors when they needed to. So
right.
clearly they saw some utility. Like I
It
can't
makes no sense. Yeah, there's
understand it.
yeah, your own quote, please stop looking for logic where there
Yeah,
isn't
where there
any.
is
I mean,
that.
it really, that resonated with me because I constantly try to look for it. Like, this doesn't make sense. And when that quote came out, it's just like, God, it's hard to stomach reading that, but it's so true. And I think Adam comes to this as well when he thinks about the real purpose of archiving this. Like, for a while he's so positive, so positive. But then when the mass killings start happening, he's like, oh, my job really all along has just been to preserve this moment because we're not going to be here anymore.
Right.
And it was such a disheartening, you feel like, no, don't give up, but it's hard. I mean, it's just, it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. I know when people ask me, my friends, they're people like, oh, so what's your book about? And I just don't even just like, well, it's a little lighthearted romp. Like I don't even know what to, it's just it's a book about
Yeah, no,
and
nothing lighthearted about it.
yeah.
Although I will say, I did love the symbolism when you had the dandelion pushing its way through the cracks of the crumbling sidewalk, because that there was bits of hope throughout this. The humanity of it, the fact that Adam couldn't stop helping others with children, them sitting down to eat the meal together, all 9 of them in the apartment, just getting people to sit down and communicate their life story. I mean, you did sprinkle in some hope there for us because it was real life, right? But God, it really is a hard topic. Like, how did you, because this isn't COVID, like, how did you maintain your sanity, you know, to be able to continue and get up and, like you said, make yourself want to write these verses down? Because I can't imagine that was easy.
I think it's not that it was easy, but because I was with Adam the whole time, and this is where writing starts to feel like sort of woo-woo, like you're with another person, but that person exists in your head. And in other circumstances, they would medicate you for this, but in this circumstance, they pay you for it. So I don't know. But like, because I got to spend time with Adam, who was full of hope and who had talents I don't have, and who was doing his best to be helpful, it was not horrible to be in this place.
Mm-hmm.
I also cheated a little bit, and I made things a little bit better sometimes. Like the idea of imagining an apartment with 9 people in it, no toilet that doesn't flush was like too much for me. So like I made sure their toilet always flushed. And the idea that like they would never ever have, I don't know, running water, I couldn't. So I would fudge around the edges, even though it's probable that they'd run out of running water more than they ever did in my book. I made it comfortable enough so that I could imagine being there with them. But really, the reason I could write this book and was thrilled to return to it every time I had a chance to, when I was writing it, is because I liked being with Adam so much, and I was rooting for him so much. And I decided from the very beginning, and this is where the spoilers come in, I knew he would live. I knew Adam was going to survive, and I wanted to get him out of there. And
Yeah.
so it sounds strange, right? Because obviously I don't know. I'm creating this, but like at night I'd fall asleep and imagine what I was going to write the next day and like how I was going to keep moving him forward.
Yeah, I
And
mean
it
that's
not
light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Well, Anissa, she couldn't make it tonight, but she said she met you in Savannah, and
Uh,
she said I love the book, and tell Lauren, she could tell you put so much time researching this book, but she wanted to know what was the hardest scene to write in the book and why.
so again, spoiler. Yeah, I'm sorry to even talking about it is awful, but there's a scene in which a child is shot. And we don't see him shot, but we see Adam come across, and it's a child that he knows. And it was hard for two reasons. First of all, it's just hard to reckon with this. This is a child that I'd written with a great care and really envisioned, and a child who was almost the same age as my own child. Uh, and then also I had to research things I don't ever really want to look at. I'm pretty squeamish in general, but I wanted to see what a bullet hole would look like, or what happens to the body right after it's shot, and like where, if you're shot in the head, like what is the blood, what happens. And so I had to quickly look at those pictures just to get a sense of describing it the right way. And that was awful. And I didn't want to write that. I didn't want to write it emotionally, and I also just don't like, but I just felt like in order to be honest about what was happening, you can't not write that. It happened all the time. There were so many things that were so much worse than anything I wrote in the book that really happened. And when I was in Auschwitz, there was a prison inside Auschwitz, which is insane. There was a prison inside the prison, and there was a prison inside the ghetto as well. One of the punishments in this prison, there was a space that could just about fit 4 people standing, and you would just be stuck with 3 other people in this tiny square space for days. That's your punishment. It's so sadistic, right?
Yeah.
You're just trapped. You can't move. You can't, like, I still, when I
Yeah.
sometimes that pops into my head. I don't tell you that to give you nightmares, but just as an example of how much I didn't, like, I really sugarcoated a lot of what
Yeah.
happened. But I had to write that scene because I couldn't sugarcoat the whole thing. And
The
people are
mother's
surprised when they say, like, what, this was like cleaned up for us. And unfortunately,
yeah,
yes.
that mother's reaction though, it's
Yeah.
I mean, to me, I think how it, like you just react, it's I don't know, that was heartbreaking. And I know it was hard, but I am glad that authors are taking the time to educate and to, and so that we do have a perspective on this, because this is hard stuff. But we need to know about it. There was,
The way I always think about it is if people had to live through it, then I can write about it. You know what I mean? Like if this really happened, surely I can find the strength in myself to write it.
absolutely. Well, thank you for doing that. I did want to ask one more question because, I mentioned it earlier when he gave the necklace over to the guard.
Yeah.
But as soon as he does and he turns around, he mentions that there's a lightness. And he says this because he's just now free of hope. He doesn't even have to hope anymore. He knows he's just given away his one chance. And that just sort of threw me as well. Like I thought about it, I'm like, yeah, but there should be dread, but there wasn't. I mean, he just I don't know. Like, what was your perspective on that? Because for me, I had so many emotions while he
Have you
was
ever just
walking
made
away.
like a horrible, not a horrible, but like a really tough decision? And after you've made it, you're still not sure that you're right, but at least the decision has been made. I don't know. I have, I guess.
Yeah,
And um, and it's just so freeing. And even if something really bad comes from having made this decision, not having to worry about it anymore is pretty great. As far as the freedom from hope itself can be a burden, especially in a situation where hope is so hard to come by. Like, I think you need hope to live. I have hope all the time, but having to work to have hope in the circumstances that Adam finds himself in by the end of the book, I think he was starting to even feel like it was sort of burdensome to
yeah,
hope this necklace would save him, to hope that someone would bribe, the bribes would work the right way. And he, like, to hold on to that faith was starting to become really exhausting. And I think he felt really free when he didn't have to hold on to that anymore.
Well, the other part that you were talking about, how you felt twisted when you were thinking about the real world. I was thinking on the fairy tale aspect from how did she say it? Pani, is it Pani Duda? I don't know how to
Yeah,
pronounce.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Is that right? Okay. And how she gave out this curse. And I
yeah.
thought, what a wonderfully wicked fairy tale that story would be. That sort of Eastern European or
Yes,
Hans
yeah.
Christian
Totally.
Andersen, like
Mhm.
if you are going to go back, like, and you could stomach it, I would think that would make the best fairy tale.
Wouldn't it?
Obviously not Disney fairy tale, but yeah.
No,
Yes.
but a
I
woman
mean,
was so consumed by hate that she ended up somehow
that she
cursing.
ended up cursing her entire family
Yeah,
to where not one descendant was left.
yeah,
Right. I don't
yeah,
know. I think there's something
yeah.
there if you ever decide to
All right, that I
go
could do.
in.
I could
No.
do it from that angle. I don't think I could ever come back. Yeah, people are like, "Oh, are you going to write a sequel?" And I often feel like I could write this book from a different place entirely, but I couldn't write a sequel because when I'm done with a book in a specific way, I'm done with it. I've never been able to sort of start reimagining characters. Once I put them to bed, they're in bed.
But so Adam's with you the whole time, and then all of a sudden he walks out of the gate and is sitting waiting, and that's it. That's all you've imagined, or have you pictured
No,
him beyond?
I know. I just can't write it anymore. I know what happens to him.
Can you tell us, or
Yes,
is
but
that
I
secret?
say, no, of course I can tell you, but what I will say is that I believe strongly that every book belongs to their reader. So what I
Yes.
decide happens to Adam, if you want to think something else happened to Adam, that is perfectly fine. Like with my favorite books, I know what happened to those characters. And so if the author was like, no, 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 this is what happened, I'd be like, no, you're wrong. I know because it's my favorite book. So Adam survives. He adopts the children. He makes it to New York. He lives an incredibly prosperous life. He marries finally and has a biological children and raises all three by himself. And the reason I know that that is what happened is because that is what happened to one of my friends growing up, her grandparents, where they escaped. They left behind family, friends. They were teenagers when they escaped. They made it through Romania to Palestine to the United States through relief agencies and all sorts of. They became jewelers in the United States. They built up a huge sort of wholesale jewelry empire, became incredibly prosperous, had 4 kids, and lived long, healthy lives. So I know that that was possible. And I
Yeah.
believe strongly that that's what happened for Adam, who deserves it after everything he's been through.
But the mother, did they ever see? No. Yeah. That was
The
like,
reason in that story, so to talk about the ending briefly, is just that 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 story is often told as the beginning of a Holocaust survivor story. Is like, well, my mother gave me up, my parents gave me up, and that's how I lived. My own cousins, my family's not French, they're Polish, but some of my cousins are in Paris and they survived the Holocaust. My cousin, my grandmother's cousin Rosa survived because her mother gave her and all of her jewelry to a convent. She did reconvene with her mother after the war, which is kind of a miracle. But when she tells her Holocaust story, it starts with my mother gave me up. And I always thought, well, that has to be the end of the story. But that's not, that is the most cataclysmic, horrifying act of love I can imagine, is to give your children up to strangers so they'll survive, or to anyone so they'll survive. And I just felt like that has to be the climax of this novel, because that is
yeah.
the most um, biblical act of sacrifice I can think of.
Well, we saw her strength immediately. I mean, she was the first one to shave the head. Like, she just
Yeah.
had so much love to give. And when it came to it, I knew that there was no way she wasn't going to, right? She had to be the one that put her children first, and she did
Yeah.
without a doubt, really. It was beautiful.
She never blinked. Yeah.
I have got some rapid fire questions. Y'all be thinking of what you want to ask Lauren. And while you're getting them ready, I'm going to just go at it. I think you might have answered some of these, but we'll see. All right. Do you like researching or writing better?
Uh, I like them both, but writing in the end, I guess.
Are you
Researching
a
is candy, but like writing is like a good solid meal.
plotter or pantser?
Plotter, total plotter,
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
early bird.
What's the estimated number of drafts for this book?
This book came out almost, this is not usual. This book came out almost fully formed and was like 2 drafts.
Okay. Have you ever kept a diary?
Not really, no.
What is the fact that you learned that has stuck with you the most from this? What research fact?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's such a great question. Um, I learned that I learned so much. This is so simple, but like I learned that there were like satyrs in the ghetto the week before the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and those satyrs had matzah and prayer books and the whole thing.
Beautiful. Do you write alone or do you write with a group?
Alone, total alone. Yeah.
Do you have a literary BFF, someone, another author that you stay in touch with quite a bit?
Yeah. So one of my very best friends, I have a couple. One is Madeline Miller, actually, who blurbed the book before I even asked her. She loved the book. She didn't just love it because she's my friend, but she's a really good friend and I adore her. There's a woman named Kelly Braffett who writes total opposite books from mine. She writes these sort of fantasy books that we could not, but we met in grad school and I love her, love her, love her. And she holds my hand completely. And I don't know if you guys know Karen Russell, but she's a pretty well-regarded writer who's such a genius that but if you haven't read her yet, you should. And she writes short stories and novels and essays, but mostly short stories. And those three women inspire me and make me want to do my best work, and I love them.
I love that literary community. All right, group. Do y'all have any questions for Lauren that you'd like to ask? Oh, Jenny says, I love Karen Russell. I just read Orange World and recently got Swamplandia.
Oh my God, she's so good. Yeah.
The other thing Jenny mentioned before I forget, she said she's happy to consult on anything related to Polish culture if you do end up writing the book about Pani Duda. So
thank you, Jenny.
All right, Mary, let's get you to ask a question. Let me add you a spotlight. Go ahead, Mary.
Laura Beth, I always have to chime in.
I love it. I love it.
So actually, this was a question that was answered for me. I was one of the blessed that got to go on the tour with Susie to the Holocaust Museum. And one of the questions I had, I didn't, and maybe this was addressed in the book and I just didn't understand it. But the fact that that they could get their fake papers and walk out of the ghetto, because in my mind, this was a enclosed ghetto. They could, obviously the Jewish people could not leave. And what I found out at the Holocaust Museum is this particular ghetto, which was huge in terms of population, the reason that the kids especially could do their trading and stuff was because non-Jewish Polish people could come into the ghetto,
right?
And it was like, a little city. They could do their business and then they had their papers to walk out. There was another ghetto there that was not that way, that was fully enclosed. The Jewish people had no contact and starved much more than the people at the Warsaw Ghetto. So my initial question was, how could they just walk out? And then I found out it was because there was a quote open border for the Polish non-Jewish to come in and out of the ghetto, which I hadn't realized, which was fascinating to me, that it was a kind of a lively city that they were living in, but they were trapped in there.
Right. Exactly. In some of the ghettos in the Baltics, in Lithuania and Latvia, people left every day for work detail and then came back, were locked in at the end of the day. So there were, and then the question is, well, why didn't they escape? Why didn't they leave? First of all, it wasn't safer necessarily on the outside. It could be turned in at any moment. And, people did sometimes escape. Ringelblum himself escaped towards the end. But, when your family and your resources and everything you had were inside and you could be shot on sight much more easily on the outside. And it wasn't that easy to leave. I mean, you needed to either falsified papers or real documents, the incentives to leave weren't as high as you'd think. Also, remember, Polish people were suffering terribly. Warsaw was decimated in the war. So again, it's not like on the outside of the gates, even though the novel makes it seem that way, because from the perspective of the Jews inside, sometimes it was. But by 1942, 1943, I mean, everything that was happening outside the gates was brutal as well. So it's not like you would leave and just go to paradise or something. You'd leave into another horrific war zone where you could be shot immediately.
Great comment. Thank you so much for that, Mary. All right, I think we have Janie. I'm going to get you to unmute. And if you would like to ask your question, go ahead.
Hi. I read a lot of World War II fiction, historical fiction, mostly because my parents, I'm a daughter of the greatest generation. And my father would never talk about it. So I guess it's sort of my way of, honoring him. He's gone, but, because I couldn't get it from him. He would just get up and leave the room. This book affected me in ways that no other book has affected me. I think it's a masterpiece. And I think a lot of it is because of your characters and how fully formed they are. They became so real. And I find myself walking around the house, and if I look at the bookshelf, I go, yeah, now that I think about them. I know you're not going to write a sequel. I got it. But I'm just wondering how the experience of writing this book for you, and especially with your own family history and everything, how that may have affected you now going forward. Do you look at writing differently when you're thinking about new projects? Does it somehow, do the words resonate differently? Has it changed you in a way?
Oh, she's frozen.
First of all, thank you. That's so kind. I'm frozen?
No,
Oh,
you're back.
no.
You're back.
You're
You're
back.
back.
Okay. I'm glad I was frozen because I was getting teary and I don't want, so thank you so much, Jeannie. That's really kind. I think as a writer, it's rare that for any writer, and it's rare for me that a novel would come to me pretty fully formed the way that this one did. And I think I'll keep trying to catch that kind of lightning in a bottle. Like these people, it's not that I met them fully formed, but in the 9 months between going to Poland and starting the book, I read so much, I researched so much, I thought so much that by the time I sat down and started, I felt like, and I had such a clear idea of the final scene that the book almost felt like it wrote itself. And I don't know that that'll ever happen again. I will say that what it has done for me is just made me even more attuned than I like to think I already was to, and this sounds so, forgive how this sounds, but just like I'm even less able to face like war and suffering now. I feel like I feel like that wound is still open, like it's not scabbed over in a way, and that I don't let myself turn away from what I don't want to see, but what I see now in the news, what I read about in Sudan and Gaza and Israel, I mean, I feel even more profoundly shaken than I might have before, because I think I spent more intense time with real suffering than I had ever had in my life. So I don't know if that changes me as a writer, but I think it's absolutely changed me as a person.
Thank you for that, Lauren. Great question, Janie. I'm gonna ask a few follow-up. Anybody else have a question first before I start asking more questions? Because I have a couple. I wanted to know, since you aren't working on a novel like this next, can you tell us what you are working on?
Sure. Yeah. I have another novel coming out in August of 25. And the reason, I don't usually write that quickly, but when I sold this book, it was time for my son's bar mitzvah was in planning stages. And my son did not want to do a wholesome family trip to Europe. He wanted a big ass party, and those are expensive. And so in order to pay for the bar mitzvah, I sold 2 books at once. And this was the first one, which was already written, but I had to write another one. So the book that I'm working on now is in a way a response to this book, but it's not a sequel. When I started traveling, I went back to Poland 3 times. It was interrupted by the pandemic, of course, but I went to Poland and I went to the Baltics, and I started finding myself, and it was all around the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which feels and felt to me very, very, very terrifyingly reminiscent in many ways of the way World War II started, with a lot of the same hemming and hawing on the side of democracies, and so at least this democracy. And so in traveling to all these places that are really on the front lines, like I was in Lithuania, and we were having dinner outside, and a man heard my family and I speaking English, and after we were all getting up, he was at the adjoining table, and he said, "I'm sorry to bother you. Are you American?" And I said, we are. And he said, "Can I hug you?" And I was like, "Sure. I mean, anyone can hug me, I guess." And I was like, "Yeah." And he said, I want to thank you. You keep my country safe." And I was like, "I didn't do anything, man. I mean, sure." He's like, "Without you, we know that without America, it would be wiped off the face." And I don't know that most people could find Lithuania on a map. I don't know, I mean, it's just the idea, the outsized role that America plays in the world is something that I think most Americans don't even reckon with. And so the novel that I'm working on now is about an American woman in the country, in Tbilisi, Georgia, as the Ukrainian war breaks out. And it's in a weird way, like we must not think of ourselves as also about American power without having any Americans in the book. And this is also a book about American power. And I think I'm interested in those subjects because as an American myself, I often feel so totally powerless, but compared to so many people in the rest of the world, I'm really not. Does that make any sense? I don't know if that makes sense. But anyway, that's what the book is about, an American woman in Tbilisi, Georgia. Also, the other reason I picked Tbilisi is that the food is so good there. So doing a research trip to this little country in the Caucasus is like, it's like an excuse to eat the best food of your life for a week. And again, call it research. So.
Well, does it have a title yet, or is it, or not quite there yet?
Right now, it's called so I never keep my own titles.
Okay.
This was the first title I ever kept. And the reason it's called We Must Not Think of Ourselves is because I was just like, it's a line from the book. It's fine. I slapped it on the page before I turned it in and was certain they would change it because they've never let me keep a title. So right now this book is called A Dog in Georgia, but I have no idea if it'll stay. It probably won't be that when it's published.
And what's the estimated published date?
Sometime in August 25 right now. So
Okay.
I'll let you. Yeah.
And Jennifer did have a question. She wanted to know what you are reading now, and I would like to tack on and ask about what you would recommend.
Okay, so I just finished this book that I loved, and some of you might have read it already because it's getting huge praise. And usually if a book gets that kind of like adoration, I'm like, but enough people I trust told me it was amazing, and it is. It's called James by Percival Everett. It's a retelling of Huck Finn from Jim the Slave's perspective. It is so, I have not, I'm busy, I have 2 kids, like I 2 dogs, like I could never read a book in a day and a half. I read this in a day and a half. It sounds, you don't have to have read Huck Finn or remember it, and you don't have to, it's not like medicine where you feel like you're doing something virtuous. It's smart, funny, fast-paced, shocking, beautiful, violent, amazing. So I loved that book. And now I've just started it's called A God of the Woods by Liz Moore. She wrote Long Bright River, which I really love. She's a fellow Philadelphia area writer. And I'm like 10 pages in, but so far so good.
Exciting. Okay, Lauren, if you have any connection to Percival Everett, like I would love to interview on James. So if you can make that happen for me,
I can ask.
I would love, and I know several.
So I've met him twice, and I will tell you, he's a tough get, but I can see what I can do.
All right. Yeah. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed. And I just wanted to end on saying, just what a wonderful experience. I mean, I can't say this was like you said, it's not like a light read, but it was one that we definitely, I'm so glad I have read it and I have digested it, and kind of like what Janie said, I keep thinking about it, which is a sign of a great book. So, we so appreciate that. I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us tonight. Just to give y'all an idea, in 3 weeks, we have another author chat coming up. It's going to be with New York Times bestselling author Chris Whitaker. And this is sort of a back-to-back read
Oh,
with
that's
Jenna
cool.
pick. I
He's
don't,
the recent Jenna. Yeah.
yeah, and we've
I
never
haven't
had a
read.
back.
He's on my list though. I've heard that that book
Well,
is great.
you
So
need to join, like
I'll
join
join.
it. You
I'll join.
can
I'll
ask
read
him
it.
a question.
Yeah. Okay.
But this is an epic novel about a man fixated on finding a missing woman and the FBI agent on his tail who might be even more obsessed than he is. So just y'all have 3 weeks to get it read. Like we said, we'll be discussing spoilers. It's a little bit earlier on Sunday because he's in the UK. So keep that in mind when you're planning out that day. I think it's September 8th. But Lauren, just thank you so much for your
Thank
attention to
you so much.
detail. Thank you for going to those dark places that I know it's not easy to go to and writing this piece of history into your historical fiction. We so appreciate it. And just giving us your time tonight. A big thank you to all you readers out there. Thank you so much for reading this book and then joining. Make sure you connect with her on Instagram for the latest news. Like I said, I'd love if y'all would subscribe to my YouTube channel, LB the Lover of Books. And I'm on Instagram, Facebook. You can find me lots of places, but I will see everybody in 3 weeks. Lauren, you're
I'll
off.
be,
You're
can I say
awesome.
one more thing? Actually,
Yes.
you guys for the Midwest, and they're actually sending me on a paperback tour. And I'm going to be in St. Louis and in Kansas City and a few other places. It's all on my website. If any of you are in those areas, I would so love to meet you. So please come. And thank you, LB. Thank you. Thank you guys. I would be nothing without readers. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope everybody has a great rest of your night. Yep, lots of applause, lots of thanks. And somebody's like, come to Chicago. So maybe you can add it on. All right, everybody, have a great night, and I will talk to you all soon. Bye, everybody.